Okay, so in Acts 23, Paul is being asked by the Sanhedrin. It doesn't know what the charges are against him and why he's been referred here. So we just did a video on the tumult over Trophimus and his defiling of the temple and uh, Paul being seized by a mob and then Rome having to step in. So it was all about, did you participate? Did you encourage Trophimus to violate the middle wall of partition in an uncircumcised state, going through what's called the middle wall of partition and cause a defiling of the temple? So Paul was saying, hey, when that happened, I'm over here doing a purification rite, so I wasn't involved. That was his original defense to the first court that interviewed, but now he's in front of the Sanhedrin and he's getting another opportunity. So this is Acts 23, 6-7. Okay, so here's what happens. So we got the NIV on the left and the KJV on the right. We'll look at the NIV. Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, and I think we all know that the Pharisees believed in that there was such a thing as eternal life, and the Sadducees didn't believe in eternal life. And Jesus had an actual lesson where he showed the Sadducees, their disproof of eternal life is if a person had to marry their 5 different brothers, who is that wife a wife to when they get to heaven? So she'd have five husbands, and that would sound immoral, right? So Jesus says, you don't understand the eternal life. It's not, you're not in marriage anymore. So that's what the Sadducees believe. There's no eternal life, and that disproved example they had was completely baseless, is what Jesus said. Okay, so you should remember that. So the Sadducees don't believe in eternal life. The Pharisees do. He says, so let's begin over. Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, my brothers, I am a Pharisee, descended from Pharisees. I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead. Okay, so Luke has told you why he's doing this. He knows these people have a theological huge divide between them. Sadducees uh, um, don't believe in eternal life, and the Pharisees do. And so he's going to say, that's why I'm on trial, because they weren't advised. They don't know why he was brought to them. He's just dragged in and tells them in court. In court. So by this point, he'd already had to have been put under oath, by the way. So he's testifying in court. And this is what he tells the judges. When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. Okay, so what ends up happening is they start getting into a battle, over the doctrine. This man's being persecuted for believing in the resurrection. The Pharisees are coming to his defense because they believe in that, and the Sadducees are like, you're wrong. And so now it's a big fight over a theological issue. Okay, so now we'll go to the next slide. So Luke is going to explain this much more quickly and simply than me. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection, verse 8, that there are neither angels nor spirits. How about that one? But the Pharisees believe in all these things. Acts 23, verse 8. Okay, I'm not going to interject my opinion about the honesty or integrity of this at the moment. Let's hear what Calvin said. Calvin is a Paul defender through and through, but let's see what he says. Calvin says this: for the astuteness which he used was closely related to a feint that was not far removed from lying. Okay, so Calvin is saying what he's doing is he's being deceptive. He's actually lying. He's telling them, I'm on trial. This is what I've been charged with, is believing in the resurrection. That's what they're interpreting, is what he's saying, and that's what he intended them to understand. Calvin continues, Paul's stratagem seems out of keeping with a servant of Christ. Well, of course it does. We don't lie in court. Paul, Calvin continues, Paul says the circumstances of his case turn on the resurrection of the dead, but we know the issue was about other matters, that he abrogated the ceremonies and admitted the Gentiles into the covenant of the Gentiles. Well, actually, that's not exactly it. He was accused of having brought in the Gentiles into the temple, Trophimus specifically, and led him into the holy area where uncircumcised Gentiles are not allowed to go. Okay, so here is the statement by Luke of what is the actual charge against Paul. The true charge is in Acts 21, verse 28. Crying out, men of Israel. So these are the Jews of Asia. They're upset about Trophimus, and they're roaring loud at Paul and trying to get everyone in hysteria to go after him and grab him. Crying out, men of Israel, help! This is the man, Paul, that teaches all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple, and has polluted, defiled is the more accurate word, this holy place. So that's why he was being charged. He ultimately, the key here is what happened right here in the temple was he allegedly brought in Gentiles who defiled the holy place. That's what the true charge was. Werner's Bible Commentary, it's free online, by the way, wernerbiblecommentary.org, not a bad commentary. It discusses this, and even though it's apologizing for Paul at every turn, it says the following. Moreover, he, Paul, was fully aware of the opposing views to which the Pharisees and Sadducees adhered, so it appears that he deliberately chose to set the members of the court against one another. In other words, his answer wasn't designed to tell the truth. It was designed to create a division. Okay, the Visual Bible Live gives a little more of a criticism here. In this story, Paul deliberately spoke about his belief in the resurrection, so he would cause a division between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So that's actually more particularly what he did. He didn't give the answer which was truthful, which is he's on trial for allegedly causing a defilement from his friend Trophimus, which, by the way, would have caused everyone to be absolutely on Paul, and they would all be in opposition to him. But he changed the issue by not telling them what he was actually being charged with. Now, again, this is all happening on the same day in great excitement. So it was predictable that when he gets to the Sanhedrin, nobody has told the Sanhedrin what's going on, and they're going, what's going on? Okay, so that's another frank statement about what he's really doing. Here's another book, Loveday. Alexander Loveday, Acts in its ancient literary context. He writes in 2007, the Sanhedrin hearing is deliberately hijacked by Paul into a theological debate on the resurrection. Exactly. It was hijacked. It was taken off where it was supposed to be going, finding out what had just happened in the court, the temple courts, and now they're being told that this is about the resurrection, and that's going to just create controversy and no resolution, and nobody is being informed of what really is going on because somebody is telling them a lie. And Chaim Maccoby, he's a Jewish scholar, and he's written a book about Paul called The Mythmaker back in 1986, and he says this in a very frank way. Paul's use of the resurrection issue demonstrated, quote, great presence of mind, but at the same time it involved a distinct lack of scruple to play on the situation to escape the condemnation. So essentially, Paul has misled everybody what's going on here, and he did it deliberately to exploit their theological differences. Now, biblically, there's a real problem here. The Sanhedrin is a court. In the article, or the Shira Schoenberg in the Sanhedrin book, says the ancient Jewish court system was called the Sanhedrin. So we're in court where oaths are taken in order for people to testify. That's the way the Sanhedrin works. So what he's saying and telling them is obligatory. It must be truthful. And even if that wasn't the case, even if you weren't sure, you still don't lie to the judges because you're going to put it on the oath in the next minute or so. But it's hard to imagine they begin the proceeding and didn't make sure he was put under oath, just like we do in our court systems. It's just a basic thing. You don't let people just get up and talk without being put under oath. So why is this such a problem? Because one of the 10 Commandments isn't about lying. It's about testifying falsely in court, false testimony. 10 Commandments prohibits bearing false testimony. This means you cannot lie in court. And you can look at the Wikipedia article on false witness. And I'm going to cite Wikipedia again. I mean, I have my own views, but I'm trying to find people who are neutral and how they would perceive our what Jesus might say about this, because I don't want anybody to say I'm spinning this. According to Jesus, false testimony comes from the sinful desire of the hearts and make people unclean. All right. So again, that's what we're seeing here. We're watching false testimony to the Sanhedrin court. This is same article. According to the New Testament, Jesus explains that obedience to the prohibition against false testimony from the Ten Commandments is a requirement for eternal life, citing Matthew 19, verse 19, Mark 10, verse 19, and Luke 18, verse 20. Repeated 3 times. There are just a few things that Jesus repeats over and over again, and this is repeated 3 times. Okay, and we'll read Matthew 15, verses 18 to 19 to see that it does say what they say. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man, for out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. So that's what we have so far, the false witness in court. And there's a little bit longer quote, Matthew 19, verses 16 to 19. Jesus says this, or he's asked a question, and this is how he answers. And behold, one came and said unto him, Good master, what good thing shall I do, that I may have eternal life? And he said unto him, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God. But if thou wilt enter into life, keep the commandments. That's Exodus 20, verse 6, by the way, he's quoting. He says unto him, Which? Jesus said, Thou shalt do no murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. So, yes, Wikipedia was right. So in conclusion, and backed up by Calvin and other Christians' concurrence, that we're talking about, basically a lie, a feint in court, misleading the court on what you were charged with, knowing what the charges were against you the whole time, doing it solely to divide the court so they wouldn't proceed forward on trying you on the issue, which you might lose, right? If you can just create confusion, you might avoid them even ever getting to it, and they might release you, and you'd be out of there, and you could run home and go wherever you want to go. So this is material what he's doing. So Paul bore false witness in court when the Sanhedrin was not briefed on the charges previously. It was too exigent, meaning this is just happening. And Paul exploits that. Paul lied about the most fundamental fact, the charge against him. I don't think there's anything more fundamental you can do to throw a court off from its job. So, and as Calvin said, it does not appear worthy of a servant of Christ, and it's really far beyond that. It's definitely not, and does not obey Jesus' injunction against false testimony in court. So I hope that helps. These are some of the things the hard things we have to do with Paul. We have to examine him, test him. We're supposed to. Jesus says, test the fruits of someone who's going to claim to be a teacher or a prophet. And Paul's claiming to be a prophet too, right? When I speak, I expect you to follow me because I'm talking for God. He says that a few times. So anyway, I hope that helped. Add a little more detail in the what's going on that particular day. We talked about in the last 2 videos about Trophimus at the temple.